My brother calls me last week. He's like, how you doing? And I wasn't thinking, and I was like, oh man, it's cold. I'm cold.
It's California cold.
Yeah. And then as soon as the words come out of my mouth, I regret it.
The kind of brutal winters only Californians know.
I'm just like, oh, fuck. And he responds with, oh, it's cold. Oh, how cold is it? And I was like, it's 59. And he yells into his phone, it's minus 22 wind chill here. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then I was like, well, fuck, at this point, I might as well just go for it. So I was like, well, Thursday, it's going to be like 78.
Sure.
And he's like, yeah, okay, yeah. And I was like, well, that'll at least be nice. And he goes, yeah, enjoy it. At least my house isn't going to burn down. And I was like,
quiet, please.
Well, yeah, you got a point there. It's like all things in life coming with the trade-off.
3, 2.
Company presents a truly terrible podcast. Welcome to Nonsense Season 3, Episode 3. I'm Jeff Parker.
I'm Stidle.
This is our take on the week's business, tech, and entertainment headlines. This time, we'll look at tariffs, the good and the bad.
There's good? Really?
Yeah, there actually is. It's National Escape Day. Every year, National Escape Day beckons you to move away from your daily life and invest some time in rejuvenating yourself, to live life fully and in the moment.
I'm pretty sure my wife treats every day as National Escape Day.
Good for her.
I mean,
how's your week going?
My week?
No, the other guy I was talking to.
I never know who you're talking to. You never make eye contact. I feel like you're talking to the guy behind me. I've got cameras everywhere. I've got cables. I've got new switches.
Yeah.
My house looks like a Best Buy the day after Thanksgiving.
Picked clean.
No, wait, what? No, like shit everywhere. There's just open boxes. There's cables coming out. Just like it was like rummaged through and like just put away poorly. Anyway, and here's the thing. I'm still not done. There's more shit showing up today for me to install.
Sure.
So after we're done recording, I'm going to just go home and sit by the window and like a puppy when his human goes to work, just eagerly await like the arrival of Amazon, UPS, and FedEx, because I have Amazon stuff coming from all three today.
Sure.
And this brings me to my second point.
Yes.
This is all because of you.
I'm so sorry.
This is your fault. All of this is you.
I'm so sorry.
And it took me a while to figure out, listener, you won't know this, but Jeff sends me all these links. He has a little fucking affiliate code in all of them. I'm basically funding his way of life.
I should.
You totally should. But when I'm not ordering equipment that I'm going to pretend to wire up and install, I've been just immersed in AI all this week.
This has been another week of AI.
Somehow more than normal. Yeah, it's been exciting because this week we validated that it's not just the maths that I think are valuable in progressing AI forward, but it's also creativity. So that's going to definitely propel us and AI forward, which is good for me because I have more of the creativities these days than the maths.
Fantastic.
So, anyway, that's been my week. How about you? What have you been up to the past, 2 weeks actually? How's your past 2 weeks been? We haven't done this for a couple weeks.
We went to New York, saw Oh, Mary and Eureka Day, two fantastic shows on Broadway. Oh, Mary is about Mary Todd Lincoln. It's not really about Mary Todd Lincoln. It's a hilarious look at Mary Todd Lincoln, the fictional version, but really, really funny.
Okay.
And Eureka Day is about the private schools that you and I have sent our children to, making great fun of them and how they treat issues and things. And actually, it turned out to be a really good show.
I like it.
Also saw the Concert for America, which benefited those in need from the LA fires.
Okay.
New York was freezing cold.
Yeah.
But shock and surprise, I had a lot of really good food.
Yeah, it's all there.
I'm sure we have just as much good food here in LA, but you rarely, because I'm not coming to LA from out of town, I'm not cramming.
Yeah, you don't go to, it's always there. Yeah,
going to all the good restaurants in 1 week.
Absolutely. I mean, you could just, for 1 week in LA, you could just go to Mozza every day and you'd have the same experience.
Shall we discuss DeepSeek?
Has there been anything going on this week?
I know, right?
It's been pretty quiet news cycle. I haven't seen a lot. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Trillions of dollars of market cap have been vaporized by a press release.
Which I'm fine. I don't care about that. That part's completely uninteresting.
Yeah.
But I think the actual release of DeepSeek, which is this Chinese company that has put out an AI that they claim to have made for under $6 million, that runs on way less power, requires way less compute, and even the training apparently required way less compute. We don't really know that.
They've said this,
This could be quite revolutionary. Everybody keeps equating this to our Sputnik moment.
Yeah, which is an interesting analog. I appreciate that you're putting on the stamp of alleged, because we don't really know. Like, if to be clear, if this was a startup out of, Austin, Texas, here in the good old United States of America, I would still be a little skeptical at what they've said.
Well, sure.
Right?
Because everybody who comes out with an AI, from Baidu to Alibaba, I mean, literally everybody when they come out with it, it's better than OpenAI. It's better. You have to test those things. And there's qualitative as well as quantitative things you must test.
Exactly. So, and I also think it's very hard to, this is going to be obvious as soon as I say it, it's very hard to make the qualitative things quantitative as well. So it's hard for you to compare them apples to apples. There are a lot of metrics. They're gameable, if that makes any sense. Like you can build a thing to meet a score as opposed to building a thing that suits a bigger purpose. I'm always a little skeptical of any of these sort of Chinese companies that come out and say,
because you're racist.
Mainly because I'm racist. That's where most of it comes from.
I get it.
Some of it's just because I'm just a bad person as well.
That's shown through, yes.
They don't have a tendency of being on the up and up. You know, we have a tendency of seeing things that aren't as they actually are, whether it's in chip manufacturing or, a little embellishment here and there.
Sure.
I've read through most of the paper. I haven't finished it. This is the DeepSeek V3 paper, but I've read through most of it. It does appear that there are some very ingenious and novel things that they have done.
There's some good engineering in there. There is some inventive engineering.
I would put most of those into the efficiency bucket. Make this thing train and run faster.
Because they didn't have the big processors. They didn't have the big GPUs. We restricted them from having them.
Maybe.
So they had to work around that.
I'm not convinced that they didn't have access to them for running.
Well, that time will tell. Time will tell.
Certainly time will tell. I appreciate that. At a minimum, they're standing on some modicum of the shoulders of giants, because and Altman actually tweeted this. I think it was good for him to remind folks of this. Just because something can be done makes it easier to do. Just having the sheer knowledge that it's doable.
Of course. By the way, Sam's standing on that too. Thank you, Google Transformer Invention.
Of course.
Totally get it. Yeah. We're all standing on the people who came before us.
Fine. But you still know that you could build an AI that does this. We didn't know that several years ago.
We didn't know we could build one that took 1% of the resources to build.
Well, yeah, but
that's a huge advancement.
But that's the efficiency step. Starting from nothing to get to something is a step. Starting from nothing to get to something that you already know it exists and makes it more efficient is an easier step than starting from nothing. My hunch is they used existing services to help seed this thing. If you look at how they talk about their process, there's some sort of...
I think we all acknowledge that. Microsoft is going so far as to say that they think DeepSeek has used data that they've stolen.
A part of me does love that irony, by the way. And I'm going to be a little broad stroke here. You have these AI companies that have used and slurped up the IP of everybody and everything to build their AI.
Stolen freely. IP from everywhere.
That's your word choice. I say, borrowed or read or just learned from. But hey, tomato,
stolen
tomato.
Freely.
But then I do find it mildly ironic that they're now like, wait a minute, you can't use the output of our IP. No,
you can't steal from us.
That's different. I actually do think it's different, but I just think it's amusing that they've said
it's different. It's the same thing.
I think it's different, but that's okay. Only one of us can be right.
You can't take our stolen goods.
No. That's different. That's different. It's fascinating to see. I believe they use this for some of the reinforced learning that they did after they built the R10 model.
For sure.
I think at the end of the day, though, it's healthy to be a little skeptical about this. I do think we'll see more information come out.
Sure.
My hunch is they've done a little bit of embellishment. I think it's probably more truth than embellishment to what they've said.
Yeah, you can run the 400 gigabyte model, the whatever that thing is, the R1671B.
671 billion parameter.
On sub $100,000 hardware. The revolutionary thing for me is we'll find out how they built the model and how it works and all of that in time.
Yeah.
But the fact that they have put it all under the MIT license and made it truly open source so that anybody can modify the code or play with it or stand on their shoulders, that's revolutionary. We have not seen that before. By the way, everybody talks about this being who's the head, the US or the China? This is open source versus closed source. And open source just threw down a huge gauntlet.
Sure. Well, let's unpack that a little bit. So one, you've got folks running around who I'm pretty sure just don't understand the very basics of anything in technology, let alone the nuance of open source licensing, that are literally bitching about the fact that we had open sourced some tech, namely Meta choosing to open source their Llama models.
Different license, though. It's not a license at the level of MIT.
Yes. Open source-esque. Point being, releasing their code is what they're saying.
Yeah.
Bitching about Meta with their Llama, releasing the source code and their model. And they're saying that this has allowed China to catch up to us, right? That's their argument. Their argument is they shouldn't have done this. They should have kept it closed. And then that would have kept China behind from catching up to us. That entire logic to me is flawed.
Sure.
Because what you absolutely get, especially in research, right, which is really the stage that most AI is in, is still just coming out of research into commercialization over the past couple of years. You get sped up development. You get much faster development.
Yeah.
So had you done that, had you not opened up the Llama source code, again, not a true open source, you wouldn't be where you are today.
I'm going to wrap this up with one thought.
Oh boy.
I am hoping that everything they have said about this model is true.
Yeah.
I'm hoping everything DeepSeek has said is 100% true.
Yes.
That they really did make it on the lesser GPUs.
Yes.
That it really is this much more efficient.
Yes.
That it really is open source and open source into the future.
Yes.
And then we can maybe put to rest this notion that Chinese engineers are somehow inferior because they're all, just like us, people trying to solve problems.
So first and foremost, I 100% agree with you. I would very much like for every single part of this to be true. I would like for every single part to be exact, not just true, but non-embellished and exactly as written.
Yes.
I'd like it even better if it was undersold.
Okay, great.
If they're like, oh, we said 5.6, but really it was like 20 grand. I would love it. I would love it if that was the case, right? Like, no, I would.
Sure.
Because I think then it shows something that's even more important than nationalistic tendencies, which is that the tech will always sort of win. Like you'll find different applications.
Yeah, sure.
I would love that. I would also love for there to be a more equaling factor across geography of engineering at large, because at the end of the day, I'm with you. We're all, your intent as an engineer is to try to solve the problem and do it as well as you can.
Yep.
I do think, though, that the climate in which you're brought up in and that you learn and that you sort of, what's okay and what's not is extremely different, which is why I do not think these will all come out to be the same. And we are, for good or bad, we are programmed here in the U.S. to be very willing to take risks. Mm-hmm. And that is something that's very unique and embedded in our culture here that you don't have really anywhere else, not to the level that we have here. Because for the most part, we embrace failure and it's okay. You can go raise money, start a business and fail. And as long as you aren't SBF, as long as you aren't committing a bunch of fraud, you can do it again, And it doesn't mean that once you fail, you're done. Mm-hmm. And you get outside of this country and there are a lot of places where it's like, once you do it, they're like, oh, no, that's the guy that lost money. And it's like, well, no, you tried and it didn't work. Was your premise sound? Like, did you at least, give it a go? Or like, did you fuck up the execution, steal the money? Okay, it's a different animal. And I would like to see that be a little more equalized around the globe. I don't think that's going to happen quickly. That's my takeaway. And that's why I think that I really do believe, and I've experienced that has affected me, but I see elements of that in the engineering. I see where they're unwilling to take as many risks in trying to build a thing. It's a lot more, and I do think that's what we're going to see here. There's a decent amount of what I'll call copy AI that's happening. And it's been extended from that, and there's been value in that. But I do think there's a decent amount of copy AI here, and they have not been forthright about that in their paper. That's what I see currently.
We shall see. Time will tell, my racist friend. Okay, enough of the headlines. Up next, we're going to talk about tariffs, when they work and when they might not.
Tax the brown people, everybody. That's all I want. That's all I want. I've been saying it for years. If you're white, pay no tax. Everybody else, tax.
Let's go. I think it is so exciting that you are going to take your kids on a Disney cruise. I think that's really cool.
Great. Then you should take them.
No, I didn't want to go.
You want me to go.
All the Disney resorts to me,
yes.
All they smell like is just this strong chlorine.
It's better than a strong smell of urine, like when you go to the water park.
I know.
So you get to choose which acidic smell would you like better.
They know how to make their cruises and their resorts safe for kids.
Yeah, so I've never done a Disney cruise before. I've done very few cruises in my life. And at first I was like, no, please, no, not the Disney cruise. But now I think I'm actually looking forward to it. It sounds like a great time. The kids are going to love it.
Yeah, of course.
I get to not be with them for some chunks of time, which I think will be lovely.
They design
and
that.
Just like read a book or whatever.
They engineer that into the week.
But like all things with the mouse, like every time you're like, oh, what's this over here? And it's something else that they've just engineered perfectly to fit like a puzzle piece. Uh-huh. Like, oh, you don't want to wait in line to get on the boat? Stay at a Disney property. We'll transfer you. And it's like,
oh yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I see how this works. Oh, you say the Disney property? You have to buy 2 days at the park. And you're like,
how to extract the maximum amount of dollars.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Just going to give you all of my money. All of a sudden they make Scientologists' asks look small.
Yes.
That's basically it.
I am not of the opinion that you are a terrible parent if you don't take your kids to Disneyland.
Sure.
It's okay.
Yes.
It's stupidly expensive.
Yes.
Do yourself a favor and your neighbors and the people you live around who have children a favor and normalize the fact it's okay not to go to a Disneyland or Disney World resort.
Or do what I do and the neighbors that you just want to watch suffer, buy them tickets to Disneyland. Just be like, hey, I got you kids a gift. Here you go.
Because the $9,000 you're going to spend in add-ons.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, exactly. Yeah. Oh, would you like a popcorn? It'd be $8. Like, that's not bad. They're like, each kernel is $8. Like, what the fuck? What happened?
All right, this segment is not about Disney.
No.
We've just gotten sidetracked. This segment is about protectionism.
Yes.
That relates to something about your Disney cruise.
To Disney. You would think that we'd be talking about copyright and protectionism in that form.
The mouse, yes.
Not. This is different. So here's what I discovered. The TLDR is we looked at a bunch of different cruises in different places.
Yes.
What I've discovered is that Disney, while they offer most of their cruises go like round trip, right? You leave from a port, let's say Port Canaveral. You go to some places in the Bahamas. You then come back to Port Canaveral. That's how most of their cruises work, as is with most cruise lines in the United States. However, they offer some cruises that are one way. You'll leave from a given port and you'll stop somewhere else. You'll end somewhere else. And I discovered one of these from Texas to Puerto Rico. And I was like, well, I don't really want to fly back from Puerto Rico. That's kind of a pain in the ass. So there's another cruise leaving the same day that goes from Puerto Rico back to Florida. I was like, oh, this is perfect. It'll give us like 9 days on the boat. It'll be fantastic. Kids will love it. We get a layover in Puerto Rico. We can see some friends, yada, yada, yada. I'm literally about to book this. I'm doing some Googling to see if I can leave my bags on the boat between these two segments.
No, you can't.
Well, yeah, not only no, you can't, Disney will not let you stitch these two segments together.
Correct.
And I was like, wait, why can't I put, like, this makes no sense. And there's something called the PVSA, which stands for the Passenger Vessel Services Act of 1886.
Yeah.
And you've done some cruising, or I think your parents do a bunch of cruises.
My parents used to cruise quite a bit. Yeah.
And are you familiar with this PVSA?
You basically can't take a foreign ship away from a port in the U.S. back to a different port in the U.S.
A different U.S. port. That is correct.
You can, but it's like an $800 fee.
Yeah, they charge a fee, which I'm assuming is per person. I don't think it's per boat. I think it's per,
of course.
If it's per boat. We can just have a little GoFundMe. GoFundMe on there. Right? Like a little mutiny. We're taking this boat to Boston, motherfuckers.
80 cents a piece.
So there are two exclusions to this. So and the important part that Jeff just mentioned there is that it's how the boat is flagged.
Yeah.
If the boat is flagged as a U.S. boat, which means the boat was made in the U.S. and is operated under sort of a U.S. jurisdiction, U.S. company, then you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? Like it's a boat. Yeah, have fun. If it's a foreign flagged boat, which most all of these cruise ships are foreign flagged, if you embark from a U.S. port, you must return to the same U.S. port for that trip.
Yeah.
There are only two exclusions to this. One is if you visit a distant foreign port, which is basically defined as anything that's not in North America, the Caribbean.
Sure. You got to actually be going somewhere.
You got to go far. Yeah. The other exclusion is returning to the same port. So this is how they force you onto a U.S. carrier boat is you have to come back to the same port or visit one of these distant ports. There's no distant port you can visit in a couple of days, right? You can't.
Right. You're on a long trip if you're visiting.
So that's
a distant
out,
port.
right? Yeah. You have to go to you're going to like Sydney or South America or something like that. So that's out. What happens is you end up with these trips that are basically round trips to be on a boat. You leave Port Canaveral, come back to Port Canaveral, leave Fort Lauderdale, come back to Fort Lauderdale. Or you end up with a boat that stops you somewhere else. And Puerto Rico is odd because you would think of that as a U.S. port or at least a non-distant port. There's a current exclusion for Puerto Rico, I think because there's no U.S. flagged boat that runs that segment.
Okay.
So they've given it an exclusion. I just want to book a fucking Disney cruise, right? That's all I want. Now I'm like learning about cabotage. Right. Do you even know what cabotage is? Like I see the word cabotage and my first thought was that must be some sort of delicious salad. That was my first thought when I saw it.
Or a slaw.
Or maybe a slaw. Yeah.
Sure.
So I wasn't sure.
It's going from one port in a country to the same country. Just a different port.
Okay. So clearly you know that, fucking English major. It's a transport of goods or passengers between two places in the same country.
Yeah.
It initially applied to just coastal routes, but it has since, I think, it applies to everything. Aviation, railway, road transport, whatever. Cabotage. I had no idea.
I don't think there's cabotage tariffs for planes.
Well, that's what's so interesting. So if I can't go from Galveston, Texas to Florida on a foreign flagged boat via Puerto Rico, however, I'm pretty damn sure I can get on an Airbus airplane in LAX and fly anywhere in the U.S.
Of course.
Whether it's a U.S. carrier or a non-U.S. carrier, which is why this was so foreign to me. Now, again, to be fair, this act was put in place in 1886, so it's still pretty new. They haven't worked out all the kinks yet. They're still trying to figure it out. But I look at it, I'm like, well, why does this still exist? Like, this clearly isn't just sitting in like a drawer somewhere.
Because once you put a tariff on, it's nearly impossible to take them off.
Yes. The argument for keeping the PVSA around is like, oh, well, it encourages shipbuilding in the U.S. And you're like, how much shit in the U.S. moves by boat to the U.S.? Not a lot.
Right,
there is some, not a lot. How much boat building do we really we need.
Because they wanted to keep the U.S. naval, shipbuilding skills. But the shipbuilding skills of Navy ships now is so different.
Completely different.
From shipbuilding of any other type.
Also, 150 years ago, your choices for travel were boat or horse. That was it.
Well, rickshaw.
Okay. Or rickshaw. Thank you. So I appreciate that. But I feel like, certainly times have changed. And as Jeff just pointed out, there aren't restrictions like this on airplanes or trucks. Yeah. But it's super interesting to me that this is still in place. And when I look up who supports this? Like, who supports this act still? And big surprise, it's the one cruise line that has a U.S.-laid boat that goes to a U.S. port that's different than where it embarks, and that's Hawaii. Yeah. And also, the few states that still do shipbuilding, they want to keep this around. I don't really know why, because they're not building many ships for passenger transit.
Sure.
But the point is, this is considered protectionism. This is a tariff that they put on you as a passenger going from one port to another without one of these distant stops. Now, Disney, as a point of policy, just won't let you do it. They won't let you pay the fine. It looks like some cruise lines will. Yeah. In this case, they just won't let you pay the fine. I probably wouldn't have, even if they let me, because it would have raised the cost of the trip pretty significantly.
$3,200 for your family of four or something like that. Yeah.
Which would have been about a third of the cost of the overall trip. So I was like, probably wouldn't have done it. But this just opened up my eyes to like, okay, what does protectionism look like? And clearly there's been a lot of this talk in the news recently as we're talking about putting tariffs on other countries.
Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
3 kinds of protectionism we want to talk about. Tariffs, quotas, and subsidies.
They're all various forms of protectionism. And they sort of, I wouldn't say they serve a different purpose. The purpose is typically the same. It's just executed in different ways. Yeah. It has been argued by some historians that no major country has ever successfully industrialized without some form of economic protection. And there's this economic historian, which, by the way, I am not, Paul Baroque.
Everything I know about tariffs, I learned in my 5th grade civics class.
As Jeff is saying, neither he nor I are experts on this.
The stuff I learned in 5th grade, it's still remarkable how much... Yeah.
You're saying you are an expert.
How much of the rest of the country doesn't seem to remember.
Well, and look, I'll put myself into that bucket, too. I had never really thought long about this. If I did learn it in the past, I don't think I did. I certainly didn't remember it. Digging into this now gave me a whole bunch of perspective around what's going on here. So this economic historian Paul Baroque wrote that, quote, historically free trade is the exception and protectionism the rule, which I thought was kind of interesting because
it's a terrible rule.
Well, yeah, that seems to be the way this has mainly been implemented.
This is not how your country gets richer and richer.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit.
The way your country gets richer is a currency velocity.
Yeah. Yes, of
the
course.
time it takes for the dollar to go from the butcher to the baker to the candlestick maker and back.
Yeah.
The faster you make that happen, the wealthier and better everyone's lives become, whether you do it within your borders or within the entire world.
Yeah.
And in a world with nuclear weapons, you really do want the rest of the world to continue to live better and better.
In that example, you just have increased the speed, that's the velocity, of the money flowing. So you just have more transactions happening. That's the basic gist of it.
Because that means we all make more profit. We all work harder. We all make more goods. We all have more services. Together, our lives are all better.
Yeah. Another economist that wrote a book on this attempted to debunk the idea that protectionism made America a great industrial power. And that's a notion that was believed by some to offer lessons for developing countries today.
It's 100% untrue.
Well, he's trying to debunk it. I mean, that's his point. He's trying to debunk that. America's share of global manufacturing went from 23% in 1870 to 36% in 1913. And that was during the sort of admittedly highest tariffs of the time, right? They came with a real cost, estimated about 0.5% of GDP. This is around the mid-1870s. But while it may have sped up some development in some industries, American growth during that protectionist period had more to do with abundant resource availability and openness to people and ideas than the tariffs, right? That's historians looking back at this and saying, but it's very squishy.
Let me just throw in here that anytime you have 2 economists in a room, you will have at least 3 opinions.
At least 3 opinions.
However, when it comes to protectionism, you almost always will get universal agreement from economists. Protectionism bad.
Yeah, sure.
The thing that's hard to get people to understand, even wealthy people who should know better, you do not want a bigger slice of the pie.
Yeah.
You want to enlarge the pie itself.
Sure.
So that there's just more pie.
Leave me alone in the room with that pie for a little while. It'll fucking change size, I promise you. It'll change shape too. No, I hear your point. No, you're absolutely right. That is a longer term think. The shorter term think is, well, if I just take some of your pie and some of his pie over there, I get a bigger piece of pie. I don't really care what happens to them.
There are several stories that I remember about tariffs. Okay. And I think this particular one is quite enlightening.
Okay.
In post-World War II, the Germans were buying a lot of chicken from U.S. farmers.
Okay.
Now, we have in this country for a long time subsidized the growth of corn. Now, there's a lot of good reasons for that.
Sure.
If you subsidize the price of food, especially a root food like corn, it literally makes everything we make cheaper. Because we don't have to pay our people as much to feed themselves. They can spend their money on other things.
Okay.
So it's like a mass subsidy for almost everything the U.S. makes.
Okay.
Corn.
Yeah.
It makes raising chickens really inexpensive.
Okay.
So the U.S. was selling tons and tons of chickens to Germany, and German chicken farmers were quite upset, understandably, about this.
Why?
The German chickens were more expensive.
I see.
People were buying U.S. chickens, and they wanted to bring that within our own borders. We should raise all the chickens that we.
They wanted the freedom chicken. I got it.
So Germany put a tariff on chicken meat.
Okay.
$1.60 would buy you 5 pounds of chicken before the tariff. After the tariff, chicken became $2.20.
Even the imported chicken?
It was the only one that was hit by the tariff was the imported chicken. But the domestic producers of chicken raised their prices, of course, as well too.
Well, why not? Everybody else is charging more because they got to recapture the tariff. So I might as well, rising tides lift all boats.
And there's more demand for their products since the imported chicken costs more. So there's more demand for their products, so they raise prices, right? So imports absolutely plummeted. So the U.S., this is the retaliatory tariff part of the story. Anytime you put a tariff out, there's going to be retaliation for it. And you think, okay, well, the U.S. will then put a tariff on German chicken.
Schnitzel. No more schnitzel in the U.S. $74 to the German economy. It took a hit.
You have to find some place where you're going to hit them where it matters, right? Okay. Sure enough, the U.S. put a 25% tariff on imported trucks. Okay. And this includes like that Volkswagen van thing that people were buying because those Volkswagens were so cheap. Okay. 25% tariff on all imported trucks. Okay. So chicken got more expensive and Americans got fewer truck options. Okay. The people who get hurt, the consumers.
Yeah, sure.
It helps some very specific industries. The German chicken farmers did a little better. The U.S. truck manufacturers did a tiny bit better. Yeah. Mostly it was consumers were paying higher prices, and in the U.S., consumers were having less choice.
Because for the same reason, they charge more for the truck here since the competition truck price went up.
Of course. Okay. So this leads us to my second economic story. Okay. The washing machine tariffs.
Yes. This is my favorite.
This is fairly recent. So
like the past 10 years, right?
2018, something like that.
Yeah.
It was an issue of jobs.
That was the goal, right? Yeah.
If we bring manufacturing of washing machines back to the U.S.,
we have more jobs.
We'll save some washing machine manufacturing jobs. We'll create washing manufacturing jobs.
Sure.
Great. Fantastic. We'll put a tariff on those washing machines that are coming to us from LG and Samsung, South Korea, wherever the washing machines are coming from. We put the tariff on the washing machine, and the price of all the washing machines go up in the U.S. Conveniently, washing machines are generally sold with dryers.
Yes.
So if you raise the price of the washing machine, the dryer manufacturers are like, we can raise our prices a little too.
Relative parity.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. If you're selling box springs and mattresses and you have a tariff on one of them, you can raise the price of the other one.
Yeah, of course. It's always broken my brain on the washing machine dryer relationship because one is a much simpler system than the other. Yet they almost always have price parity.
Yes, one has much bigger margins.
I gotta believe the COGS on one is much, exactly. The margin has to be much bigger on the dryer.
So LG and Samsung, because they're not stupid, just changed the location of where they were assembling these washers.
And not a small tariff. It was like a real tariff. Like for the first small number of units, like 50,000 units, it was 20%.
Yeah, above 1.2 million units, it becomes 50%.
The point is, it was a stepped tariff. The tariff went from 20%, which is a real number, to 50%, which is a much more real number, right? Like
For sure.
That's a lot.
And so they moved, LG and Samsung moved manufacturing to China. Yeah. And they were able then to miss the tariffs, and they were still shipping tons of units. And so we set that tariff against washers coming from China.
Yes.
And so they moved manufacturing to Vietnam and Thailand. And they're very adept at moving where they're assembling their washers. Obviously, it doesn't matter to them.
What's fascinating about this is they didn't spin up a new plant. They already had plants in those locations that made other things. Yeah. They just said, oh, well, wait a minute. If this is it's gonna hurt us trying to import this stuff from South Korea, we're just going to move it over here. Now, what is also fantastic about this was from an academic paper that Jeff and I had looked at that showcased this recently. You could still see the exported parts from Korea going out of Korea to these locations.
Of course.
As they'd move factories, you'd see a couple things. You'd see Korean exports go up to that country. So Thailand, they're making them in Thailand now. All these washing machine parts are going to Thailand. And then you would also see imports of washing machines from Thailand in Korea go up because they're like, well, we're not going to just make our domestic supply here. We're going to concentrate it all. So they would just sort of play this whack-a-mole game to avoid the tariffs. But really, that's just whack-a-mole, right? They buy a couple years every time.
Cut to 2018, and we set a tariff on washers coming to the U.S. that are imported.
What I think is interesting is that Whirlpool petitioned the USITC, which is the International Trade Commission, I think, right? Is that what it stands for?
Yeah, sure.
And they said, hey, we have a problem. We've got these manufacturers bringing in product and selling it at a lower price. It's not fair. They actually said it's not a fair value price.
Right.
We need you to put a tariff on them so that we can compete. And I think that's an important part of the story because what happens next is when they put this tariff on to raise the price of these imports, Whirlpool went, well, shit.
I can get more money. I can get more
if
margin.
If they're going to get $1,000, I'm going to get $1,000. Why not?
Sure.
Which, from my naive perception, eliminates the value of the tariff that they were asking for.
But it's always what happens. It's because the demand goes up for your domestic product, you are able to raise your prices.
Oh, I completely understand that. But my point is, at the end of the day, they really just said, hey, can you help us raise our prices a little?
Look at the next step and what happened. Samsung and LG opened factories in the U.S.
So then they're like, okay, fuckers, we're going to make them in the U.S.
Which did create new jobs.
Yes.
It created 1,600 new jobs plus 200 new jobs at the existing domestic factories in the U.S. And washer tariffs then brought in $82 million to the U.S. government that year.
Which sounds good, I guess, right? You want to make more jobs, $82 million in the U.S. for free for washing machines. Okay, cool.
The additional cost to consumers, however, because the price of the washing machine went up, and of course the price...
Well, you would think it's at least $82 million, right? Maybe a little more.
Not even close.
No.
The additional cost of the washers and dryers in aggregate across those two items sold in one year in the United States went up $1.5 billion the first year that tariff was implemented.
Yes.
So each one of those 1,800 jobs, we paid $815,000 per year for.
Yes.
And those jobs were sub $50,000 a year jobs in aggregate.
Yes.
So you were paying $815,000 to hire someone to do a job for less than $50,000.
Yes.
This is not an efficient jobs program.
And by the way, that $800,000 per job is year over year.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just the first year. It was annual.
Yeah.
That is like you cut off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah.
So yes, you got the jobs, but at what cost? And as it turns out, it came from everybody that has to buy a washer and dryer, which as it turns out is, I don't know, everybody.
Everybody every 6 years roughly. And the lifespan is supposed to be 10 years.
You're either buying one or you're using someone else's that bought one. That's it.
Yeah.
Like everybody's washing their clothes. What was also, I thought, sort of interesting about this was that academia did a similar analysis of the 2012 tariffs put on Chinese tires.
Yeah.
And they found roughly the same order of magnitude of cost per job created. It was around $900,000.
Of course.
Which is, again, kind of fascinating to me. So on that point, you go, well, this just doesn't work. You didn't achieve what supposedly they were trying to do, which was raise the price of the other units to favor the U.S. manufacturing, because they just raised their price along, right? They took parity along with it.
Right.
But then you also have these complementary goods, like you were saying with a washer and dryer. These tariffs were not put on dryers, only on washing machines. Yet
dryers raised their price.
the average washing machine went up $86.
Yeah.
The average dryer went up $92.
Something we haven't explicitly mentioned yet, tariffs tend to cause inflation.
There were no tariffs put on dryers.
Sure, but you can charge more for one, you can charge more for the other.
Exactly.
Because they seem to be sold together.
Exactly.
Now, it's kind of an interesting thing that the downstream jobs, we don't count those, the downstream jobs that were lost.
You also don't count the $180 that someone was spending extra on a pair of washer and dryers every approximately 6 years.
That they now couldn't spend to go out to dinner at a restaurant.
They couldn't spend that on something else. Yeah.
Of course.
Going to a restaurant, buying some other thing, whatever it was. So, but then I just zoom back and I go, why did we do this? Do we want to make washing machines? Is that what we want to do? Like, is that like as a
well, there
country,
are people whose fathers made washing machines and they think they have a right to have a job in a factory making washing machines.
It doesn't seem like the most forward-looking prospect, especially when you've got labor costs that are increasing at a rate that's not the same as other places.
Yeah.
We also started way earlier. I look at the logic of it and I go, this doesn't make sense. Even on what the ask was. Forget about the execution. You just walked us through the execution.
Yeah.
The ask is we want to keep making washing machines.
Yeah.
Like that really is the heart of the ask. And I go, but do we? Like, is it the 1,800 people that didn't have a job previously that now go, oh yeah, we wanted this? And I'm like, well, talk about some social subsidy right there. $1.5 billion to employ 1,800 people. Just give them half of the money.
Had we written them all a check for $50,000 and didn't even make them come into work, we'd have been farther ahead.
And I feel like in this case, it probably would have been better to just do that and be like, we're not making washing machines. That's not really what we're doing. Like,
right. We should not put a tariff on washing machines because this will be extraordinarily expensive for the United States consumers. Backtrack just a second, because once you put on a tariff, we talked about this just briefly. We touched on it, but I want to make it a little more clear how much this matters.
They all have an expiry date, right? They end.
The tariffs?
The tariffs.
They just don't end. For whatever reason, we still have this cabbage tariff. How many years since 1886?
150 almost? 140?
I mean, it's been a few, and we still have this cabbage tariff. It hasn't gone anywhere. Try buying a truck in the U.S. today, an imported truck.
Yeah.
There's still, to this day, a 25% tariff on trucks.
That is bananas to me. Yeah.
It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And U.S. chicken farmers don't even think about selling their chicken in Europe anymore. It's not even on their minds.
Sure.
But the 25% tariff on trucks still exists because every line in the tax code has a constituency.
Yeah.
And once you put in a tariff, it is so hard to take it out. This is why subsidies are much better than tariffs.
Yeah.
Because usually subsidies are a finite number of dollars.
Almost always has a clock clock on it. Yeah,
we're putting so much money into the Chips and Science Act. And then after that, when the money runs out,
you got to stand on your own or come back for more.
Yeah, it has kind of a natural ending to it.
Yeah.
Tariffs, that's not the case. Nowadays, we are talking about putting a 60% tariff on goods from China and 100% tariff on cars manufactured in Mexico. And we're talking about 10% tariffs from every other country. Now, let's talk about retaliatory tariffs. They're all going to do the same things back to us in ways that matter to us. So your costs of goods and services will go up enormously. It will go up approximately for every household. They're currently guesstimating it's going to be around $1,700 annually per household just in tariff costs.
That's nuts.
And the people who are the hardest hit are the lowest earners.
Of course. I was fascinated by that truck tariff that you mentioned.
It's called the chicken tax.
There's like some loophole that Ford exploits by like putting in...
They do a little tariff engineering.
There's certain things that only a passenger vehicle would have and that a truck wouldn't, like rear windows and seatbelts or whatever. So they just slap this shit on their vehicles.
And they can bring it in.
Yeah, and they bring it in. So it costs them an extra couple $100 in manufacture, but saves them thousands in tariffs because then they're like, oh, no, it's not a cargo truck. It's a family van. You're like, that thing weighs 12,000 pounds. What are you talking about?
When you talk about downstream jobs, these same tariffs we're talking about, it will net cost 684,000 jobs.
Wow. 684,000 U.S. jobs.
Right. It's all about currency velocity.
Sure.
You need people buying things. You need people consuming things. You need people manufacturing things. You need that cycle to happen. It doesn't have to all happen in your borders. Ideally, it doesn't all happen within your borders.
Yeah.
We get better and better at things we specialize in.
Yeah.
And so we can do it more efficiently.
Yes.
And that happens. There's a certain geography to that. I know how to make shoes better than anybody else. And there's a guy who goes off and he used to work for me and now he makes his own shoes. There is a certain amount of geographically, we're just really good at shoes. By the way, that's not the United States. We make almost no shoes here.
No.
But you see how that happens because you gain an expertise regionally.
Yeah.
Economically, that's really beneficial for all of us.
For all of us. Totally. Now, there's some interesting parallels in this story you just told about the washing machines with something that's also similar of age, actually a little bit older than the PVSA, how I got us into this mess, which are what the UK calls the corn laws, which is basically their grain laws. So in the UK, they refer to corn as all of their grains, yet another fantastic twist of the English language.
Sure.
I think they were concerned about cheap grain flooding the UK around this time. So they imposed a bunch of tariffs, pretty stiff tariffs on the import of grains into the UK. One of the side effects of this was grain prices went up, as Jeff just mentioned.
Of course.
And then also people couldn't get enough grain to eat. So you actually had...
That's a much bigger problem.
Yeah, right? I mean, you start talking about people like starvation and famine. That's definitely bad. Again, going to the economic historians, they look at the repeal of the corn laws and they sort of thought of that as a decisive shift towards free trade in Britain. They're like, oh, this is when you woke up. And a recent study, so around the 2021, said that the repeal of those same corn laws, it benefited the bottom 90%, but cost the top 10% of income earners. The converse of that is the bottom 90% were paying for it the whole time.
That's always the case.
I would say probably always, but I don't know. There might be some exceptions somewhere. Who knows?
Tariff on yachts.
Yeah, the yacht tariff is a big one.
I suppose.
It really hurts, And if you don't have your yacht, you might go hungry for minutes. Could be. Or we get my caviar.
I'm going to throw one more ice cube into the cocktail here before we go forward with the good side of tariffs.
Yes.
We talk a lot about, can tariffs replace income taxes? Your income taxes can go down if we bring in all this tariff money.
What?
That's a big thing people talk about.
What?
Oh, yeah. 60% tariff on goods from China, 100% tariffs on cars coming from Mexico, and other tariffs from Mexico. They're also talking about these crazy tariffs from Canada. By the way, Canada is our largest trading partner by far.
Yeah.
Our largest trading partner is not China. It's Canada.
This is the state of Canada, right?
Love Canada. Like them to be their own country.
We should just rename it to America's hat.
All of these tariffs combined are projected to be able to bring in around $270 billion to the U.S. government.
Okay.
$270 billion. That's about 5% of what the government brings in with taxes.
So you just need to find 20 times the number of countries.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
There's only so many countries in the world.
We're going to put 1,000% tax on imports from Mars.
You're never going to tariff enough to replace income taxes.
But even if by some modicum of success, you found the same amount of money in tariffs, do you really think they'd be like, oh, you know what? We're going to just say no to this income tax.
Oh, sure.
This whole industry, we're going to just say, what? No.
It's 5% of what we bring in from income taxes. It doesn't make any sense.
All right, so let's move on now to the good side of tariffs, because tariffs, there are some cases where tariffs are actually useful.
Well, and not just tariffs, but protectionism at large, right? I think there are really good use cases. So
we'll start with Alexander Hamilton. He's probably the first one who famously said, well, you need tariffs on nascent industries.
So for those of you that haven't seen the play, Hamilton, who, by the way, was the first United States Secretary of the Treasury, that's worth noting.
Yes.
He said that developing an industrialized economy was impossible without protectionism because import duties are necessary to shelter domestic, quote, infant industries until they could achieve economies of scale. And I think that general point makes sense, but he's also implying, or at least I'm inferring, but I'm pretty sure he is implying that they need to end at some point.
Oh, for sure.
Until they can achieve economies of scale.
If you are not growing grain in your country, if you're not growing corn in your country and you want to grow corn in your country,
you help them out.
Yes, a little protectionism to help you get started so that you can compete with people.
And there might be some tariffs, might be some subsidies.
Compete with people who've been growing corn for 100 years.
Yeah.
So prime the pump, but then cut it off.
Totally makes sense.
There has to be a termination to it, and tariffs don't have that, typically.
What I sort of take from the statement is, well, he doesn't say this as clearly, and maybe doesn't imply it as directly, but also those nascent industries, I would just assume that you want those to be forward-looking industries, right? I don't think the nascent industry is like, coal. I don't think you're going to look at that and go like, oh, we really need to stand up coal. Let's put some support around it. You want it to be forward-looking industries that are going to last for more than a minute or two, not looking the other direction. Now, I'm pretty sure some people are going to disagree with me on that.
Well, there are people who said my grandfather was a coal miner. Yeah, exactly. I should be able to just be a coal miner.
But if you look at a term of time longer than a couple of months or a couple of years, it's pretty easy to go, well, that's probably not the best place for us to put our resources. Like you want to put your effort into something else that's not that. Like, I don't know, technology maybe, or medicine, or, AI, like things that are forward looking. I don't think in 2080 they're going to be a big explosion of coal companies. Oh, that's not really good wording now, is it? The big coal boom of 2080. An example of where protectionism seemed to be beneficial, net beneficial to all, was what we refer to as the Japanese economic miracle. So this is post World War II Japan, sort of 1950s to the 1980s.
Because somebody bombed them level.
Yeah, who was? I don't remember.
So they needed some help. They needed to take themselves seriously and put some money into their economy so they could actually have an economy.
Yes. So their post-war economic policy was focused on rapid industrialization through government guidance. They prioritized export-oriented growth by promoting heavy industries, and then they utilized readily available technology transfers, right? And there was a close cooperation between private industry and the government to achieve this. And it worked. Instead of focusing on the past, I view it as like they focused on the future. And especially through the 70s and 80s, they were far ahead of everyone else.
I want to move us along here. There's two more times when I think tariffs and quotas and subsidies are very useful.
Yeah.
Nascent industries we just talked about.
Yes.
But I think it's also useful when you are talking about culture, the culture of an area.
Absolutely.
But then there are also like issues of national security where you do need to be able to do things within your borders that keep you safe. You do need the skills that you need to make the latest and greatest chips so that you can defend your borders. That's absolutely vital.
Not just defend your borders, stay relevant.
Well, that's true too. But I mean, smart missiles are guarded by smart chips. So you need to be able to manufacture those chips.
No, that's what I mean. You're not fucking relevant at all in the conversation if you don't have those things.
And the third one would be culture, when you want to preserve your culture.
Yeah.
I think that one's really important too.
Yeah, preserve and advance.
Put a tariff on all those entertainment products that you bring into your country so that you can then pay to have entertainment products made in your country that reflect your values in your country.
And what are the countries that come to mind when you think about cultural?
Well, Canada and France.
Those are the two that I can think of as well. I mean, Canada does a really interesting job of this with, I think, all their content, right? Like radio and video broadcast.
35% of their radio or something like that is Canadian content.
So it's a lot of A's and a lot of hoser is what's in there.
All right, we have to get out of here, but quickly before we do, have you seen or read anything good this last week?
Well, not seen or read, but listened to. Does that qualify? Can I do listen to?
We should broaden that, shouldn't we?
Have you consumed anything good? No, don't say consumed.
Have you smelled anything good this week?
It'll all just be ribs. If you make it consumed or smelled, if those are the senses that we were allowing. This week, I really enjoyed, it was actually technically last week's episode of the Vergecast.
Yeah.
Where, did you listen to this? I think you listened to this.
Absolutely. I love the Vergecast.
Yeah, they explored the, quote, the brief life and quiet death of Venue. This was the supposed future of sports streaming. This whole story, by the way, happened in like a year. It was not long in the making, but they brought in Jacob Feldman from Sportico and they explained where sort of Venue came from, its parent company. So this is like ESPN, Fox, and Warner Brothers Discovery, why they thought it would be a good idea, why Fubo immediately sued them, right? They sort of picked a fight.
Fubo was already in the sports business. They were already a sports streamer.
Yeah, and being told, oh, no, you can't do these things you want to do. And then when they hypothesized launching this product, that was exactly that. Fubo was like, no, hold on a minute. This is not okay.
Because the whole point of Venue was let's put all the sports on one service so we can charge a ton for it.
I don't want to steal their thunder. It's really worth listening to. Now that Venue is gone, they sort of postulate what it could be. Like, is it ESPN or Amazon? Who moves in?
How sports streaming could work.
Yeah, how sports streaming is going to look in the future. It is interesting to see all these players, these streaming players getting into the space. Amazon with football, the NFL, Netflix with their, You know, they did this Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight. Like, folks are throwing their hats. And YouTube has been NFL Sunday Ticket for quite some time.
They do a pretty good job with it too.
I think it's great. I'm a huge proponent of sports on these things. I feel like it's the first advancement we've had in sports. It's like the Fox track with the fucking hockey puck, or maybe the first down line in the NFL. Like, it feels like the first real advancement. Now I can just go watch split screen 4 football games at once up on the screen.
Well, on YouTube TV,
on YouTube,
for sure.
Which is great. Like, it works really, really well. But I digress. So last week's episode of the Vergecast, I thought it was really great. It's high level. It's super interesting. It's a pretty quick listen. I think you guys would enjoy it. So anyway, how about you? What have you seen?
I saw Real Pain.
What?
Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin play mismatched Jewish-American cousins who travel to Poland to honor their late grandmother. Eisenberg plays a reserved and pragmatic father and husband, which contrasts sharply with Culkin, who plays a free-spirited and outspoken drifter.
This sounds like a modern day Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is what this sounds like.
It's nothing like that.
Oh.
And in fact, none of what I've described even vaguely sounds interesting. When I say it, I just go, ooh, that doesn't sound so good. But trust me, it really is. Or better yet, don't trust me. A Real Pain was named one of the top 10 films of 2024 by the National Board of Review and the American Film Institute. And it got 2 Oscar nominations.
That's impressive.
This is a good film.
Yeah.
A Real Pain on Hulu now.
That sounds interesting. I'll check that out.
That is the episode.
Thank you for joining us for all of this nonsense. A truly terrible podcast from The Awful Company. Visit us on the web at nonsense.productions. I'm Stu.
I'm Jeff Parker.
If you like this program, please follow, download, subscribe, and like at Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, AntennaPod, iHeartRadio, Spotify, my personal favorite, Overcast, wherever you get your Tariff podcast from.
Nonsense Studios are guarded by this guy right here, Barkley the dog. Barkley's a rescue mutt, free and open source. Next time you're tempted to buy an inbred dog or purebred dog, don't. Get a Barkley instead. You'll be so glad you did. Special thanks to our floor director, Jay Farina.
Thanks, Jay. He's also purebred. We'll be here every Thursday morning for more nonsense. Please join us.
You sure he's not inbred?
Tomato.